Welcome to ExplorinVictorian. I'm Josh Wilson, and today we're going to be talking about hatbands. So a question that I've seen come up a couple of times on some Facebook groups for Old West reenactors, living historians, guys are getting hats, good felt hats that are of a modern shape, and they're fixing them up, they're reshaping them to look more like a 19th century hat. And a question that's often asked is, how do I replace the hatband? How do I make that bow on the side of the hat? And a lot of guys think it's a way of tying the ribbon, but it's not. The bow actually isn't tied, it's manufactured. So I've got this hat that I picked up. It's kind of dirty, kind of battered. It needed a new hatband, so I took the old hatband off, and we are going to make a new hatband for it. I've got this top hat. This is an original manufactured by Riviera. And the first thing we're going to do, just so we know, is we are going to measure the length of our ribbon. It's about 4¼ inches. So the bow on our hat measures 4¼ inches long. We're going to have to double that, which gives us 8½. Then we're going to have to add 1 inch so that we have a ½ inch seam allowance on each side. We're going to take our 1 inch ribbon and measure that length of 9½ inches. We're going to fold this in half. We're going to take this to our sewing machine and sew right along the edge right there. So I've taken this to the machine and I've sewn this into a loop. Got a ½ inch seam allowance here. I sewed this in white. Normally I would have sewed that in black thread to match, but I wanted to make sure this showed up on camera. So now what we're going to do is just open this up into a loop, flatten it. We're going to open our seam allowance up. And now would be a good time to press this if you wanted. If you're using a modern iron, you want to use it on low heat. But if you just have something, you can give it a little bit of a crease with. That'll help hold its shape. Another thing that I could do, and I probably will, is just open this back up and sew real close to this seam right here to hold everything in place. Now we know this is 1 inch wide, so we need to have 1 inch this side, 1 inch to wrap around and come up the back side, and then we need to add our 1 inch for seam allowance. So we're going to need to cut a piece that's 3 inches long next. Now, if you remember the hatband on the hat, the ribbon had this little bit of a pinched appearance. So instead of doing a full 3 inches, we could do this at, say, 2 7/8, and that way we could sort of gather this together to fit into the next part to give us this pinched appearance. But what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to cut a 3 inch wide, or 3 inch long, section off of here. And I'm going to take this back to the machine and I'm going to sew this into a loop and I'll be back. So I went ahead and sewed those flaps down on either side of our seam, and then I trimmed off the excess seam allowance a little bit that was kind of flapping out over here. We didn't necessarily need that. Then I took our little 3 inch piece and sewed it. And now we're just going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to open it up and sew that seams in the middle. We're going to open the seam allowance up. Now when we look at it, seam allowance, we can see it just a little bit sticking out. So we're just going to trim off some of this seam allowance. We're going to open this up, put that in the middle like that. And again, you can iron this with a modern iron on a low setting. Just press it with something heavy. So now that I've got my little loop folded with the seam allowance in back, I'm just going to take my larger loop and slide it in there. Find the middle. And there we go. That's our bow done. And we're just going to set this piece aside. We're going to take our hat. We're going to take our spool of ribbon. We are just going to lay this down. Make sure we've got it against our hat good. We're going to measure for our length. Pull it tight a little bit. You want that tight. Come here and mark with a bit of chalk. Right where this overlap occurs. Got our chalk mark here. This is the length of our hat band. And we're just going to come over just a little bit less than an inch. I'm going to do probably about 7/8 just to make sure that sits on there tight. We don't want any weird gapping or anything. So we're going to add on our 7/8 here for our seam allowance. Now what we're going to do, we've got our length of hat band. We're going to take our ribbon, and just like we did for the bow, we're going to slide this hat band underneath. And there's going to be our hat band. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and again, I'm going to sew our 1/2 inch seam allowance across here, and I'll be back. So I've sewn across our hat band, just like before. We're going to open this up. Press it a little bit, and now this is going to get slid behind our knot that we made for our bow. We're just going to slide all this together. And now the seam on our bow is hidden, the seam on our hat band is hidden, but I don't want this to move around. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this up, and I'm just going to put a few stitches in here. I want to make sure that I don't come all the way through to this outside piece here, but I'm just going to put a few stitches to help hold everything together. I'm going to do that by hand. and then we're going to put it on our hat. Again, I'm using white thread so that we can see this on the camera. Make sure I get all the layers except for this outer one. I'm just going to kind of do some whip stitches back here. Doesn't have to be anything fancy or special. Just has to hold everything. Three times around the needle, pull it tight, pinch with our thumb, just pull the thread on through, cinch our knot down, and we'll just trim our thread. So now here's our hat band. We're just going to take our hat. There's the back. So now this is the left side. We're going to put our ribbon down onto our hat. And we'll see the ribbon was tacked to the hat previously. You can kind of see where the old threads were. We're just going to slide this ribbon down onto our hat. Kind of work it down a little bit. So once you get the band pushed down against the brim of your hat, so we just adjust it, make sure that your knot piece is sort of here in the middle of the left side, sort of adjust it as you need. And then when you look at it, you've got a bow. Now, one thing that you'll want to do here, you'll want to tack your hat band to your hat. And, you know, it doesn't have to be in a straight line, just sort of like once or twice around in an area. If this little bit loose here bothers you, you can do a tack on this side and a tack on this side all the way through the hat. And that just helps hold your hat down on your head, or the hat band to the hat, so that if your hat blows off or something, you haven't also lost your hat band. But you just kind of want to tack it down here. And then as you go around, like I say, look inside and see where those previous stitches were. You might be able to see them a little bit. Just throw a little tack there. But that is your finished hat band. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give a like and a subscribe. If there's other projects you'd like to see me do, please comment them down below. And I hope to see you next time on Exploring Victorian.